Welcome to the Daily Word, verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study the book of Colossians. Keep in mind, I am using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're using a different translation, the read is different, but the message is the same. Also, keep in mind that these Daily Word, verse by verse studies are uploaded to my YouTube channel, BP The Bible Perspective. That's BP The Bible Perspective. So like and share these videos and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. Okay, we are in Colossians chapter 3, and we are in verse 18, and I spent a little time giving a little foundation to why Paul is getting ready to say what he is saying. In creation, when we go back to Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, we see the creation, God creating the world, creating man, putting man on the earth, and then he creates woman. They have a blissful relationship. God tells them one thing. He says, don't eat of the tree, in which that's in the center of the tree. Now, they ate of the tree, and from that moment that they ate of the tree, everything changed in human history. For that reason, when Paul says here in verse 18, wives, be submissive, you can trace that all the way back to when Eve disobeyed and was allowed herself to be deceived, ate the fruit, gave it to her husband. Adam made a choice, sinned, ate the fruit. Spiritual death happened. The curse entered the world. Everything changed from that perspective. Everything changed from that perspective. So from that time, sinful man has ruled. Sinful man has mistreated, abused, and women especially. Now again, as I said before, the reason why Paul is saying this is in the sense that the world itself is not changing. Not yet. Jesus himself is going to change the world. But in the meantime, he's given us instructions on how to conduct ourselves. And so we said that we're here to let our light shine. And sometimes that means being left in situations that are undesirable so that we can shine our lights. And this is why he is saying that, setting order in the church. So verse 18 says, wives, be submissive to your husbands. Now remember, he just spent the entire third chapter telling us, right, to if we're verse 1, if we have been raised with Messiah, seek those things which are above where our life is. Now he says, with that in mind, wives, be submissive to your husband as is fitting the Lord. Now again, Paul is writing an abbreviated version, excuse me, to Ephesians. And by the way, the Ephesus letter and Colossians letter and Philippians and Philemon was written at the same time. And they would have read, because they were secular letters, they would have read those letters. In other words, they would have read more extensively in Ephesians. We're not going to take the time in this setting here. We wait till we get to Ephesians. But he kind of goes into more things. When he says, wives, be submissive to your husbands as fitting to the Lord. And that is the perspective. The word submission here is really a military term. And watch this, it means to submit yourself. So in other words, he never told the husbands to submit to wives. He told the wives to submit themselves. And notice he said, as it's fitting in the Lord. Now, so that means if your husband tells you, hey, come rob a bank with me, come be a drug mule with me. And these are very, very, very real kind of things. If your wife, if your husband, you're in unbearable situations, abusive situations, maybe they're abusing the kids. Maybe they're abusing you. He says, as it's fitting in the Lord, you submit to your husband. When it is not fitting, you don't. And so he says, wives, be submissive to your husbands. In other words, he's setting order so that there's no schism, so that there's no division, so that what? You can shine your light. That's his purpose. So wives, be submissive to your husband as it's fitting the Lord. Now, we won't get into it because Paul is not focused, is not dealing with this. There is a higher blessing in a godly Christian marriage. In other words, where love reigns, okay? And that is the higher calling. So now in verse 19, he says, husband, love your wives and don't be bitter against them. Notice he says, husband, love your wives. Which is always amazing because we always hear about wives, the command of wives, to submit to their husband. I mean, I could put all caps in this and send it, email this to my wife and Messenger, Twitter, whatever. But here's the point. Husband, love your wives. And because it's a man's world, a corrupt man on top of that, the emphasis is always on wives you submit, but it never the emphasis is on husband love. Husband, love your wives. And that's the thing right here. So that is the command. If husbands is obeying God, then they're going to love their wives. He says, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Obviously, it's kind of interesting because the assumption is that these are Christian children. But again, a lot of times, notice this, children, obey your parents. By the way, and this is one of the first commandments that was given that came with a promise. Obey your parents, children, obey your parents, for this will be well with you. You will have long life. That was the promise that would come. I'm going to tell you, many of children's problems come because of their disobedience. That we could spend a lot of time on that. And then he says, verse 20, fathers, do not exasperate your children so they won't become discouraged. So now it's interesting, he comes back and says, father, and by the way, notice he says fathers and not mothers. Not that mothers don't have their part, but notice he says that fathers were to take an active role in raising their kids. Don't exasperate them. Don't be overbearing is what he's saying. Don't be heavy-handed. So as what? They become discouraged. So these instructions to fathers. Slaves, obey your human masters in everything. Don't work only while being watched in order to please men, but work wholeheartedly, fearing the Lord. So this is probably kind of hard for a lot of people because why didn't he tell Christian slaves to revolt? That's why I spent the time talking about this very thing. We're to let our light so shine before men, and especially in the Roman world, probably in some estimates, the vast majority of the population were slaves in one form of servitude. Slaves or indentured servants, in debt of slaves, something like that. Regardless, he says, slaves, obey your human masters. Why? To let my light shine. So keep that in mind. And so then he says, work only. It says, don't work only by being watched in order to please men, but work wholeheartedly, fearing God. Why? So that when people think about you, they see Christ in you. Remember, I read the scripture with Peter. Peter says the world is watching us. The minute you profess Christ, and you make that open profession to the world that you are a Christian, the world will watch you. I can remember being at employee parties and stuff, and I would have a soda. It's like a Sprite, okay? And the first thing they would do is they would look at that glass and go, what are you drinking? What are you drinking? Okay, so the point is they're watching you. Verse 24, he says, knowing that you have received the reward of an inheritance from the Lord, you serve the Lord Christ. And so again, this is amazing right here. You serve the Lord Christ. And that's our perspective. And the perspective, notice that as I'm submitting, I'm letting my light shine. We never know who and how that can affect people. We don't know how that can affect them. But he says, you, knowing that you will receive a reward of the inheritance from the Lord, for you serve the Lord Christ. And then he says, for the wrongdoer will be paid back for whatever wrong he has done, and there is no favoritism. So we always should have a perspective with God, okay? That our perspective always should be as whatever it is we're doing and whatever we find in our lot, it always should be to God. And notice he says that there is no favoritism with God. It is with man, but there is no favoritism with God. All right, chapter 4 in the next video, so I will see you then.